Welcome, dear friends, to The Curious Case. I'm Davis, and it's always a joy to share another quiet evening with you. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Outside, the village bells have begun to toll, steady, calm, familiar. But tonight, one bell rings with a story of its own, a mystery hidden in its echo, waiting to be heard. Shall we begin? The morning felt gentle. Mist still clung to the hedges. A faint gold light spread across Skybridge village, soft, patient, unhurried. Miss Marple walked the narrow lane with her handbag tucked close. Her friend Fiona Talbot had invited her to see the new garden. Months of work, Fiona had said. It's finally perfect. The gate creaked open. Beyond it, roses, tulips. A small pond reflecting the pale Sunday children laughed near the swings. The scent of damp earth and trimmed lavender lingered. "Beautiful," Miss Marple said, her voice calm, eyes observant. "Almost too perfect, Fiona." Fiona smiled, proud. "We'll use it for the midsummer fair. The whole village will come." They walked the gravel path. Miss Marple's steps were quiet, steady. She paused beside a white rose. "Heavenly," she murmured, leaning close. "Even the air behaves here." Then silence. No breeze. No chatter, only the sound of her breath. A moment later, a scream tore through the calm, high, sharp, human. It echoed across the hedges, cutting through the morning stillness like glass. Children froze. A boy dropped his toy boat into the pond. A swing creaked once, then stopped. Fiona's eyes widened. "Oh, dear heavens," she gasped. They ran, shoes crunching on gravel. Past the rose arch, past the herb wall. The sound had come from the far edge near the old shed. That place long unused, leaning slightly, its door half rotted. "Lucy?" Fiona called out. No answer, only the faint rustle of leaves. Miss Marple lifted her skirt slightly and stepped forward. Her eyes swept the ground, and then she stopped. Something lay beneath the lilac bush. Small, still. Fiona's hand flew to her chest. She dropped to her knees. The air seemed to hold its breath. A little girl in a blue frock, one shoe missing. A doll beside her hand, her face pale, her body still. Miss Marple knelt, slow and composed. She didn't touch. She only looked. Her eyes traced every line, every petal scattered near the child's neck. Fiona's voice broke. She can't be." Miss Marple spoke softly. "Call the inspector." She looked once more at the flowers and whispered, "These don't belong here." The garden had fallen still. Not the peace of morning, but the hush that follows fear. No birds. No laughter. Only the sound of Fiona's quick, uneven breaths. Villagers began to gather near the gate. They didn't come close, just stood, uncertain, whispering. One mother clutched her child tighter. A boy's toy boat floated untouched, bumping softly against the pond edge. Fiona trembled beside Miss Marple. "Someone do something," she whispered. Her voice cracked. She looked at the child again, then looked away, as if sight itself was too heavy. Miss Marple stayed on one knee, calm, focused. Her gloved hand rested lightly on the gravel, steadying herself. She examined without touching. The child's small frame told her everything words could not. The girl's dress pale blue cotton, torn slightly at the collar. One shoe missing, the other scuffed. Her hand still clutched a small rag doll, its arm torn. Petals lilac and white rested near her mouth and neck. Not fallen petals, placed. Miss Marple's gaze narrowed. The flowers were wrong. Bell-shaped, thin-stemmed, not from Fiona's beds. She knew every plant here. These had come from somewhere else. A faint bruise marked the girl's temple. A darker line traced her neck. It wasn't deep, but deliberate. Not a fall, not an accident. And her fingers soil under the nails, though the path was swept clean. Fiona sank to the ground, tears spilling. "She lives next door," she said between sobs. "Lucy Everton. Her parents moved here last spring. She always played here. Always so sweet." Miss Marple didn't answer. Her eyes kept moving from bruise to doll to petals. She noticed the doll's small cloth hand was damp, as if held tight too long. The thread at its neck slightly frayed. "Don't touch her," Miss Marple said softly, when a gardener took a step forward. Her tone carried quiet authority. "Best to wait for the inspector." Fiona wiped her eyes. "But she's just a child." Miss Marple cut her gently. "And children deserve truth, not panic." A breeze stirred. The petals fluttered once, then settled again near Lucy's cheek. The faint scent that rose was sharp, too sharp for roses. From the lane came the echo of running feet. Someone had gone for help. Voices whispered in confusion. Miss Marple didn't move. She studied the angle of the head, the loosened ribbon, the calm on the small face that didn't match the violence of the scene. The garden, once proud and colourful, felt hollow now, like a painting with its colour drained. Fiona's voice broke through the silence. "Jane, what do you think happened?" Miss Marple rose slowly. Her eyes lingered on the petals one last time. Then she spoke quiet, certain. This wasn't an accident. The sound of an engine broke the silence. A black Austin pulled into the drive, its tires grinding softly against the gravel. Two men stepped out, one tall, polished and composed, the other, younger, carrying a notebook. Inspector Leonard Graves. Calm authority wrapped in a dark overcoat. He surveyed the scene without a word. Then his eyes found Miss Marple, and a faint, knowing smile appeared. "Miss Marple," he said lightly, removing his hat. "I might have known. Trouble does seem to bloom wherever you visit." She returned his look with gentle amusement. "And you, Inspector, always seem to arrive just after it does." The exchange earned a few nervous chuckles from the onlookers, but the air remained tense. The inspector turned toward the shed. His face settled into focus, all humor gone. "Keep everyone back," he ordered. "Constable, mark the perimeter. No one moves through the garden." Miss Marple stepped aside but didn't leave. She stood near the roses, silent, thoughtful. Graves knelt beside the body. His eyes moved quickly, head to neck, hands to shoes. "Not a fall," he murmured. "Too clean, too still." He pointed at the bruise. "Temple, light discoloration. Pressure, not impact. Maybe fingers." He leaned closer, careful not to touch. "What are these?" "Petals," Miss Marple said softly. "Placed, not scattered. Some on the mouth, some on the throat." The inspector frowned. "They're not from these beds." "No," Miss Marple agreed. "Fiona grows roses and tulips. Not this." She picked up one stem delicately, holding it near the light. Its deep purple tint caught the Sunday bell-shaped. Glossy leaves. Graves watched her closely. "You recognize it?" Miss Marple nodded once. "Belladonna. A poison if used with purpose." He exhaled through his nose. "So we have both bruising and poison. That's deliberate." She met his eyes. "Yes, one kills the body. The other hides the truth." He rose slowly, dusting his knees. "Then we'll need both a doctor and a botanist, and the family, of course." He turned to the constable. "Fetch the Evertons." Quietly. The constable hurried off. Miss Marple's gaze followed the path. The same narrow lane the child must have taken. Hidden from view, easy to lure someone through. The inspector stepped beside her. "Always the quiet places," he said. She nodded. "Murder prefers silence. It needs it to grow." He looked at her again. There was no need for further words. They both understood the pattern calm, then rot beneath. The constable returned, breathless. "The family's been told, sir." Graves nodded once, then looked down at the flowers one last time. He bent, collected a petal into an envelope, and straightened. His voice was low, certain. "These flowers don't grow here." Granville House stood grey against the pale afternoon, curtains drawn. No birds near the eaves. Even the ivy on the walls seemed still, as if mourning too. Miss Marple arrived quietly, escorted by Inspector Graves. The front door opened without sound. A maid led them through the hall, pale, shaking, eyes red from tears. The drawing room was tidy. Too tidy. Every cushion aligned, every surface polished. But grief never keeps things so neat. It hides them. Anne Everton sat near the fire, shawl around her shoulders, hands clasped. Her face was blank, the emptiness of someone who has stopped crying. Daniel Everton stood beside the mantel, unmoving, staring at the rug as though answers might be stitched into it. Miss Marple greeted softly. No one spoke at first. Only the faint crackle of the fire filled the silence. "I'm sorry," Miss Marple said gently. Her tone was steady, kind, yet measured. Anne nodded once. Then her voice came, faint. "She went out to play, just before tea. I thought I heard her laughing." Her eyes filled. Then the scream. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We warned her about the shed. She never went near it." Miss Marple watched him carefully. His hands were buried in his pockets, but his knuckles showed white. She noted it, said nothing. The maid lingered near the doorway, young, nervous, wringing her apron. Miss Marple gave her a small nod. "You were with Lucy that morning?" "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. "She had her doll. She wanted to pick flowers. I told her to stay near the pond." Her voice cracked. "She was only gone a moment." Miss Marple's eyes moved around the room. Something felt wrong, not loud, just misplaced. The air lacked the heaviness of sorrow. It was too still, controlled. Her gaze fell upon a small table beside the window. A child's sketch pad lay there, open, crayon lines, bright colors. She stepped closer. A little girl drawn beneath a tree, smiling, holding flowers. Beside her, another figure, tall, faceless. The outline of a head, but no eyes, no mouth. Just a blank space where a person should be. Anne noticed her looking. "She loved to draw," she said softly. "Always people, always gardens." Miss Marple turned a page, another drawing, half-finished. The same faceless figure, same flowers, same missing details. The maid shifted uneasily. "She wouldn't finish them," she murmured. "She said the face never stayed the same." Miss Marple closed the sketchbook gently. "Did she keep it near her bed?" "Yes," Anne replied. "Every night." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind raced. Children don't imagine fear. They record it. She set the book down. The fire hissed softly behind her. "Mrs. Everton," she said quietly. "Children draw what they fear." Rain had begun to fall by morning. Soft, fine rain that darkened the stone walls of Granville House. Inside, the fire still burned, though no one seemed to notice. Miss Marple sat near the window. The child's sketchbook lay open on her lap. The crayons were blunt, the paper torn at the edges. But the drawings, those mattered. One page showed a figure beside a girl. The girl's smile was bright. The figure's face empty. No eyes, no mouth, only a shape, unfinished. Miss Marple traced the air above it with one gloved finger. "Strange," she murmured. She tried more than once. The hand hesitates, erases, begins again. Anne Everton stood behind her. She was shy with strangers, she said softly. She'd hide behind her doll, but she never seemed afraid. Not truly. Miss Marple glanced up. "Then this isn't fear." Anne hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the window, unfocused. Perhaps she didn't know how to draw him. "Him?" Miss Marple asked. The word hung there quiet, heavy. Anne's face changed. "I didn't mean—" She stopped herself, but Miss Marple waited. The silence pressed gently until words came. "There was a visitor last week," Anne whispered. "Not a close friend. My father invited him." She clasped her hands. "An old business acquaintance. Mr. Reed. I hadn't seen him in years." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Did he meet Lucy?" "Yes. Briefly." Anne swallowed. "She brought him a cup of tea. He said she looked like her mother." A pause. "After he left, she drew that picture. The first one." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Did she say anything?" "Only that he smelled strange." Anne's voice broke a little. "She said he had sad eyes, but no smile. She said he looked blurred." Miss Marple turned another page. More flowers. The same purple bells sketched beside the faceless man. Children don't choose symbols by chance. Their drawings are truth wrapped in color. "She kept these near her bed?" "Yes." Miss Marple closed the book, her expression unreadable. "Children notice what we dismiss," she said softly. "They see shadows we refuse to name." Anne shivered. "You think he frightened her?" "I think," Miss Marple replied, "he left an impression that refused to fade." The rain tapped harder against the glass. In the quiet, the sound filled every pause. Miss Marple rose, placed the sketchbook carefully on the table, and turned. Across the room, near the door movement, a shadow. Edna, the maid, stood half hidden in the doorway. Her hands clutched the folds of her apron. Her face pale, eyes darting. "How long have you been there?" Miss Marple asked gently. Edna blinked, startled. I came to stoke the fire, ma'am." Her voice trembled. Her eyes didn't meet theirs. Miss Marple watched her leave. The door closed. The silence returned. And softly to herself she whispered, "Faces unseen are the hardest to forget." The bells began to toll before dawn. Slow, hollow. Each note rolled across Skybridge, heavy as fog. By mid-morning the chapel was full. Villagers stood close together, heads bowed, breath clouding in the cold. A line of umbrellas shivered in the drizzle. The world itself seemed to whisper, "Hush." Miss Marple took her place beside Fiona near the back. She held her gloves in both hands. The scent of lilies filled the small chapel, too sweet, too thick. She looked toward the front. A white coffin, far too small. Anne Everton stood beside it, her face pale, lips pressed tight. Her eyes fixed on the coffin, but she did not weep. Beside her, Daniel swayed slightly, as though each bell struck his balance. Mr. Thomas Everton, the grandfather, sat like stone in the front pew, cane across his knees, his jaw locked. Every muscle carried anger disguised as sorrow. The vicar's voice drifted through the air, gentle, kind, and far away. No one really heard him. They were all listening to something else. The quiet sound of guilt. A whisper spread through the crowd. "They say the inspectors found something." Another voice. "Poison, perhaps?" "That's what I heard." Miss Marple turned slightly, but didn't speak. She let the words pass her like wind. Gossip was loudest when truth was near. Two unfamiliar faces sat near the back. An elderly couple, travelling clothes still dusted with road. They looked like Anne. Her parents, perhaps. One of them wept quietly into a handkerchief. The other only stared ahead, motionless. And there beside them stood Edna, the maid. Her hands folded, her eyes dry. Not a single tear. Miss Marple watched her closely. Something about the stillness bothered her. Not grief, not shock, something else. Awareness. The hymn ended. The vicar closed his book. Rain pattered against the windows. The crowd began to move slow lines of grey coats, footsteps soft on stone. Inspector Graves appeared near the door, waiting for her. He removed his hat. "Miss Marple," he said quietly. "May I have a word?" She followed him to the side chapel. His expression gave everything away before he spoke. He opened a brown envelope and handed it to her. "The report came in," he said, "from Dr. Keene." She didn't need to ask. Her eyes met his. "Poison," she said softly. He nodded once. "Belladonna. Traces found in the stomach. Enough to kill quickly." His voice dropped lower. The bruise on the neck was after. Staged. Miss Marple exhaled slowly. Her gaze drifted to the coffin through the glass door. "So the flowers weren't just for show," she whispered. Inspector Graves frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked at him, calm, certain. They were the weapon. The rain had stopped by afternoon. Only the bell's echo lingered, fading through the narrow streets. Miss Marple and Inspector Graves sat inside the vestry, away from the crowd. A small brown envelope lay between them on the table. Graves broke the seal. The paper rustled softly, the sound of truth arriving. He read without expression. Then, with a slow exhale, he said, "It's confirmed." Miss Marple's eyes lifted. She didn't ask. He continued, voice quiet but firm. "Belladonna. Traces in the stomach and lips, high concentration, enough to act within minutes." She nodded once. "The same petals we found by the neck." Graves looked up. You knew already. I suspected, she said. Belladonna is a flower of contradictions, beautiful but cruel. Her tone was calm, almost sad. She was given beauty that kills. The inspector leaned back. She must have touched or tasted it. He rubbed his forehead. Someone gave it to her, wrapped in play perhaps. A flower, a game, a lie. Miss Marple folded her hands neatly in her lap. Poison needs access, she said. And trust. Graves nodded. The bruise on the neck it came after. Someone tried to cover the real cause. He paused, thinking, who would know enough to use Belladonna? That's not common knowledge. Someone who tends to flowers, Miss Marple said softly. Someone who sees beauty as harmless. Perhaps someone who knows which petals to hide among the roses. The inspector wrote a note. Florist. Gardener. Or both. Miss Marple's eyes drifted toward the chapel door. Outside, the villagers moved slowly through the graveyard, heads low. Anne Everton leaned against her husband, her face white as the lilies laid on the coffin. But further off, under the church arch, stood Edna. Her posture too steady, too composed. Her hand rested gently on another woman's arm, the older Mrs. Whitmore, Lucy's grandmother. Miss Marple watched them for a long moment. Edna spoke softly, soothing words no one could hear. The old woman nodded, trembling. But Edna's face stayed calm. Her eyes scanned the path, cautious, deliberate. Graves followed Miss Marple's gaze. The maid? He asked. Yes. Her voice was thoughtful. She weeps when seen, and watches when she's not. He frowned. You think she knows something? Miss Marple turned away from the window. She knows more than she's said, and she hides it well. The question is... She paused, reaching for her gloves. Is she protecting someone, or protecting herself? Graves rose. I'll keep an eye on her. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Do, but gently, Inspector. People who serve quietly hear everything. Outside, the final bell rang once more, long and low. Miss Marple looked down at the empty teacup before her. The rim was stained faintly purple. She stared at it for a moment. Belladonna, she murmured again. Even beauty leaves a mark. The market smelled of rain and fresh bread. Stalls lined the cobbled street, apples, ribbons, jars of honey. It should have been cheerful, but not today. The villagers spoke softly, their eyes darted to Miss Marple as she passed. Every word felt like a secret disguised as small talk. She walked beside Fiona, who carried a basket half filled with vegetables. We all need a little air, Fiona said, forcing brightness. But I swear, the village has gone quiet as a grave. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Fear does that. It silences everything but gossip. A vendor greeted them with a nod, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, two women whispered near a row of tulips. Money owed, one muttered. He said it would stay between them. Miss Marple pretended to study the flowers. Her ears, however, caught every word. Another voice joined, deeper, impatient. She turned slightly. Mr. Thomas Everton stood in the alley beside the butcher's stall. His cane struck the stones sharply. Facing him was a tall, thin man in a dark coat, stranger's face worn, jaw tight. He spoke low, but the words carried. You promised payment, the man hissed. Thomas's reply came quick. You'll get it when this is over. Until then, you'll keep your mouth shut. Miss Marple froze. Fiona followed her gaze. Oh dear, that's Thomas. But who? The stranger turned slightly. Gaunt face, hollow eyes, clothes too fine to be poor, yet too old to be proud. He shoved his hands into his pockets and stepped closer. You think you can bury this? The man said. Money won't save you. Thomas gripped his cane tighter. Careful, Reed, he growled. Careful. What you threaten. Miss Marple's heart caught the name. Reed. The man Reed gave a bitter smile. Threats don't scare the ruined old friend. Then he walked away, vanishing into the crowd. Fiona touched Miss Marple's arm. My word. Harold Reed. That's his name. He used to be Thomas's business partner, years ago. Miss Marple turned slightly toward her. Partner? Yes. Land development. Property disputes, something like that. It ended badly. Reed accused Thomas of cheating him out of land. There was talk of court, but it never happened. They haven't spoken since. Miss Marple's expression remained calm, though her mind raced. And now they meet in secret, she murmured. In the open, yet unseen. Fiona frowned. You don't think this has anything to do with Lucy? Everything has to do with something, Miss Marple replied softly. In villages like ours, old grudges are never buried. They grow roots. They walked on. The market noise returned, faint, uneasy laughter, carts rolling over stone. But for Miss Marple, every sound felt distant. Only one word echoed clear in her thoughts. Reed. She glanced back once more. The alley stood empty. Rain began to fall again, slow and fine, and somewhere behind the stalls a man watched her leave. The rain had turned to mist again. A quiet fog drifted through Skybridge, softening the edges of roofs and lanes. Miss Marple and Fiona walked slowly back toward Roseview Cottage, baskets half empty, thoughts full. Fiona spoke first. I can't stop thinking about what you said. Thomas and Reed, meeting in secret. It doesn't make sense, Jane. Not after all those years. Miss Marple's gaze stayed on the path. Sense is the last thing guilt offers. It always hides behind reason. They turned the corner. Smoke curled faintly from Fiona's chimney. The garden looked different now. Too neat, too still. The same stillness Miss Marple had felt in Granville House. She paused. Tell me again, Fiona, she said quietly. Edna? Where did she come from before she worked for the Evertons? Fiona blinked. Oh, I believe she used to serve Anne's parents, years ago, when Anne was still unmarried. Miss Marple stopped walking. The connections snapped into place. Both households, she murmured. She worked for the parents and then for the daughter, and after the marriage she returned to Skybridge with the Evertons. Fiona frowned. Surely that's just loyalty. Or convenience, Miss Marple replied softly. People in between hold both doors, Fiona. They hear everything, see everything, and decide what passes through. Fiona looked troubled. Do you think Edna's involved? Miss Marple didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned toward the hedge, watching rain gather on the leaves. She knows more than she admits, she said finally. And yet, she behaves as though she's protecting something. They reached the gate. Miss Marple stopped before entering. I remember Anne said she rarely received letters from her parents after she married. Yes, Fiona said. She always thought her father disapproved. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Or perhaps she simply never received them. Fiona's brow furrowed. You mean someone kept them? Miss Marple nodded slowly. It would explain much. Silence, resentment, isolation, the kind of divisions that grow without words. Fiona sighed. But why? What purpose would that serve? To control where loyalty lives? Miss Marple said quietly. To keep one side cut off from the other. It's a tidy trick. Keep them all needing you. The idea hung between them, heavy and real. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Fiona said softly, Jane, you think Edna was that bridge? Yes, Miss Marple murmured. She was the path between the families. And bridges, my dear, can carry more than words, they can carry lies. The garden gate creaked in the wind. Miss Marple turned toward the lane again, eyes distant. There's one person we haven't heard from yet, she said. The uncle. Fiona looked uneasy. Roger Whitmore. He hasn't spoken to them in years. All the better, Miss Marple replied. People who stand outside the family often see what those inside refuse to. She lifted her coat collar, her voice low and firm. It's time we paid him a visit. Roger Whitmore's house stood at the far end of the lane. A lonely cottage, roof sagging, shutters closed tight. The kind of place that remembered silence too well. Inspector Graves knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, the door opened slowly, grudgingly. Roger filled the doorway. Tall, gaunt, hollow-eyed. His voice was rough. I know why you've come. Come in, both of you. The sitting room smelled faintly of cold ash and stale tobacco. No photographs. No flowers. just the tick of an old clock that didn't quite keep time. He gestured toward 2 worn chairs. I said plenty years ago. No one listened then. He sat heavily, hands gripping the armrests. They called me bitter. I called them liars. And so we stopped talking. Miss Marple folded her hands neatly in her lap. You had a quarrel, she said softly. With Thomas Everton? Roger gave a dry laugh. Quarrel? That man ruined me. He and his friend Reed. You've heard the name? Inspector Graves nodded. We have. Roger leaned forward. They bought land together. I warned them Reed was crooked. But Thomas thought he could outsmart him. When it collapsed, Thomas blamed me. Said I'd sabotaged it. He cut me off. Told Anne I was poison. Said I envied them. His voice broke slightly. Anne believed him. My own sister. I never saw her again. Miss Marple listened, unmoving. There was no anger in her eyes, only quiet understanding. Did you ever try to reach her? Roger nodded once. I wrote dozens of times. Letters, small gifts for Lucy when she was born. He paused. They never answered. Miss Marple tilted her head. Never? No, not once. His eyes darkened. But there was one thing that puzzled me. Someone used to come by. Not often, but enough. A young woman. A servant, I think. Said she worked for Anne's in-laws. She'd take my letters. Said she'd deliver them herself. Miss Marple's hands tightened slightly. Her voice barely above a whisper. Did she give her name? Roger hesitated. He looked toward the cold fireplace, as though memory burned there still. Yes, he said at last. Edna. That was her name. Inspector Graves exchanged a quick glance with Miss Marple. Roger didn't notice. He kept speaking, words spilling like old dust. She was polite, quiet. I trusted her. But I never heard back. Not one reply. Now I realize the truth. Those letters never reached Anne at all. Miss Marple rose slowly. Her expression unreadable, her mind racing. The pattern had sharpened silence, distance, control. And, at the center, one person linking both homes. She turned toward the door. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore, she said softly. Her voice calm, but her eyes fierce with certainty. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Miss Marple looked to the inspector. Now we know who carried the words, she said quietly. And who buried them. Graves frowned. Who? Miss Marple's reply came like a thread of cold air. Her name was Edna. The Whitmore's house sat beyond the village square, behind tall iron gates half swallowed by ivy. Old stone, old grief. The kind that doesn't speak but lingers in walls. Miss Marple arrived with Inspector Graves in the early afternoon. The maid who answered the door looked startled to see them. Within minutes, they were shown to the sitting room. Anne's parents waited there. The grandmother frail, trembling, wrapped in shawls. The grandfather stiff, eyes red, hands folded over a cane. Their voices came slow, careful, as if afraid of breaking what little peace remained. We only came for the funeral, the old woman said. Thomas never wanted us here before, said it would upset Anne, but we never stopped writing. Never. Miss Marple leaned forward. You wrote often? Every month, the woman replied. We sent gifts, little things for Lucy. A doll, a necklace. But Anne never replied. Miss Marple nodded gently. And the letters? You kept copies. The old woman rose with effort, crossing to a writing desk near the window. Her hands trembled as she opened the top drawer. Inside lay a neat bundle tied with faded blue ribbon. Miss Marple recognized the care of someone who still believed in hope. These were the ones that came back, the woman whispered. Returned, unopened. Always the same message. Not at this address. But Anne never moved. Not once. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the top envelope. The postmarks all local, all Skybridge, yet never delivered. She turned to the inspector. Someone intercepted them. The grandmother nodded weakly. There was a maid. She used to visit sometimes. Said she worked for the Evertons. She offered to deliver the letters personally. Saved us postage, she said. Such a sweet girl. Miss Marple's expression darkened, her voice low. Do you remember her name? The old woman hesitated, then whispered, Edna. Yes, Edna Breyer. That was it. Inspector Graves straightened. The pieces clicked too cleanly. He muttered under his breath, the same name again. Miss Marple held one of the envelopes to the light. A faint crease showed near the seal opened, resealed. Not by accident, by habit. She controlled the flow of words. Miss Marple said softly. She kept both sides quiet, each family thinking the other had turned cold. The old woman began to cry softly into her shawl. Miss Marple reached across the table and placed her hand over hers. Grief can be shaped, Mrs. Whitmore, sometimes by kindness, sometimes by control. The inspector looked out the window, his jaw tight. We'll question her again, he said. She won't keep hiding behind service. Miss Marple stood slowly. Her eyes were calm, but sharp with understanding. Be careful, Inspector, she murmured. Edna doesn't hide behind service. She looked toward the door, voice cold as the mist outside. Edna never left, she said. She only changed houses. The morning fog thinned as the sun fought through the clouds. Miss Marple walked slowly down High Street, her gloved hands folded around her bag. Shops were opening. Bells above doors chimed softly. The scent of bread, soap, and wet cobblestone mixed in the air. But one scent didn't belong. Sweet, sharp, dangerous. It caught her mid-step. She turned her head. A new shop. Fresh paint. A sign that read, Reed & Co. Floral supplies. The window was crowded with vases, petals and ribbons all beautifully arranged, all a little too perfect. She stepped closer. The fragrance grew stronger. Lilies, roses, and something darker beneath bitter, metallic. Belladonna. Miss Marple pushed the door gently. A bell tinkled. The air inside was warm, humid, heavy with perfume. Rows of blooms lined the counter, each labeled neatly in small silver script. Behind them stood a man arranging stems with careful fingers. He looked up at her entrance. Good morning, he said. His smile was practiced. Looking for something special. Miss Marple studied him quietly. Tall, neat, eyes too calm, too cold. The kind of man who practiced sincerity. Just admiring, she said softly. It's a fine display. Not every village can boast such. Variety. He inclined his head slightly. Quality is my trade. Beauty deserves care. Her eyes drifted to a vase at the edge of the counter. Small purple bells. Glossy leaves. The same as those she'd found near Lucy's neck. Belladonna, she murmured. He paused, just for a fraction of a second. Then smiled again. For ornamental use, of course. Harmless, unless mishandled. Harmless, she repeated quietly. An interesting word for a plant named Beautiful Woman. Before he could answer, movement stirred behind him. A figure stepped out from the back room. Edna. Her face froze the moment she saw Miss Marple. In her hand, a small envelope. She murmured something to the man, then reached for her coat. Reed's tone turned polite again. Mrs. Breyer helps with deliveries. She knows every home in Skybridge. Miss Marple's voice stayed calm. Yes, I imagine she does. Edna hesitated near the door, the envelope half hidden in her hand. Reed nodded toward her. A signal. She tucked it quickly into her pocket and slipped out into the street. Miss Marple's eyes followed her through the glass. The faint outline of coins pressed against the fabric. Reed returned to his flowers, pretending not to notice. Miss Marple adjusted her gloves, her gaze fixed on the Belladonna vase. Beautiful work, she said gently. It takes a steady hand to handle poison so gracefully. Reed gave a thin smile. Knowledge is safety, madam. She turned to leave, the bell chiming softly behind her. Outside, the air felt cleaner, colder. Her steps were slow, thoughtful. She wasn't just carrying flowers, Miss Marple whispered. She sold flowers and silence. Evening settled early over Skybridge. Street lamps flickered to life, casting long, yellow paths through the mist. Miss Marple sat by the fire in Fiona's cottage, knitting half forgotten in her lap. The room was quiet, too quiet for peace. The clock struck 7. Moments later the knock came. 2 sharp taps, 1 pause. Inspector Graves. He stepped in, hat under his arm, eyes heavy with thought. "Forgive the hour," he said quietly. "I thought you'd want to see this before morning." He placed a brown folder on the table. Inside papers, receipts, and 1 small ledger, edges creased with use. Miss Marple didn't touch them. She only watched. Graves pulled out a folded page. "Bank records from Reed and Company florists," he said. "Cash withdrawals, all under £50 regular, weekly, and the same days Edna was seen visiting his shop." Miss Marple's eyes lifted. "Payment?" "Bribes," Graves said softly. "She's been collecting from him for months. No salary from the Evertons since February, yet she's somehow paid rent in advance." He flipped another page. "Look here, an order signed by Reed. Supplies listed as private arrangements, but no corresponding stock sold." He looked up. "Belladonna shipments unaccounted for." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. The firelight flickered against her glasses. "Then it wasn't an accident of access. It was a plan." "Seems so," Graves exhaled. "She delivered the flowers. He supplied the poison." The room fell still. Only the faint pop of the fire filled the pause. Fiona, standing near the doorway, spoke in a whisper. "But why? Why would she do such a thing? Money can't explain that." Graves shook his head. "Money rarely does. But fear might. Reed's in debt. And Edna," he hesitated, "may have owed him more than loyalty." Miss Marple's gaze dropped to the papers again. Her voice was low, almost tender. "Truth blooms slowly, Inspector. It takes time for roots to show. And sometimes they grow in soil we'd rather not disturb." He nodded. "I agree, but the ground's shifting fast. Reed's shop was closed this afternoon. Neighbors said he, packed boxes, might be running." "Then we must act," Miss Marple said calmly. Her tone softened the words but didn't blunt their edge. "Evil rarely travels far when cornered." Graves picked up the folder, gathering the papers back inside. "I'll call a meeting," he said. "Granville House. Tomorrow evening. Everyone connected Reed, the Evertons, Edna. I want every truth laid on one table." Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "Then you'll have your truth," she said quietly. "But be careful, Inspector. When truth blooms, it often carries thorns." He gave a tired smile. "I'll wear gloves." When he left, the fire crackled once, then went still. Miss Marple looked toward the dark window, her reflection faint and thoughtful. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "and then the garden will open." The clock ticked. The night deepened, and Granville House waited in silence. Granville House had never felt colder. The lamps burned low, their light trembling on the polished floor. Chairs were arranged in a half-circle, as if awaiting judgment. No one spoke. Inspector Graves stood near the mantel, notebook in hand, eyes sharp, voice steady. Miss Marple sat in the center of the room, small, composed, unyielding. Thomas Everton leaned on his cane, impatience flickering in his jaw. Anne sat beside him, pale and tired, her hands twisting a handkerchief to threads. Daniel paced by the window, every turn sharper than the last. Reed waited near the doorway, expression unreadable. And Edna stood by the wall, eyes down, face pale as paper. Miss Marple broke the silence first. "It began with a flower," she said softly. Her tone was calm, but the room tightened. "Belladonna," she continued. "Beautiful, deadly. A plant that tempts and deceives rather like the lies that have grown in this house." Thomas scoffed. "Are we to sit through riddles, Miss Marple?" "My granddaughter," she raised a hand gently, "was poisoned, Mr. Everton. Not by accident, by intention, and by hands that knew precisely how to hide guilt." He went still. Inspector Graves spoke quietly. "The evidence supports her claim. Traces of belladonna were found in your garden and in Reed's shop." Reed's jaw tightened. "Shop supplies are not crimes. Anyone could have taken them." Miss Marple's eyes didn't leave him. "Indeed, and someone did, with your permission." She turned slightly toward Edna. The maid flinched. "You carried the flowers to Lucy," Miss Marple said. "Fresh stems from Reed & Co. You thought they were harmless tokens for the child to play with, but you were delivering poison." Edna's lips parted, but no words came. Miss Marple continued, her voice low, deliberate. "Reed paid you. We've seen the records. And Mr. Reed, you needed her silence because she knew too much." Reed stepped forward. "Baseless talk. You've no proof." "Your shop ledger," Graves said sharply, "and the timing of your visits to this house. You supplied flowers here, even when no orders were placed." Reed's face hardened. She knew what she was doing. Miss Marple shook her head. "No. She knew obedience, not intent. You used her to settle an old debt, one that began with Thomas Everton." Thomas slammed his cane down. "What debt?" "The one you owed Reed," Miss Marple said softly. "For land, for pride, for betrayal. You thought it was forgotten. He did not." Reed's breath hitched. "Your family took everything," he muttered. "Why shouldn't you lose something in return?" The room froze. Anne's gasp broke the silence. Fiona, standing by the door, stepped back in shock. Miss Marple's voice dropped to a whisper. "And so, a child paid the price for men's grudges." Reed turned away, eyes burning. But Edna's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, trembling. Her voice cracked through the still air. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I swear I didn't know." Miss Marple looked down at her gently, yet her tone stayed steady. "Then tell us what you did know." The room held its breath. Edna began to cry harder, the confession forming, unstoppable. The room had gone still again. No sound. Just the faint ticking of the clock and Edna's ragged breaths. She was on the floor, shoulders shaking, eyes red and wild. "I didn't know," she cried. "He said it was harmless. Just flowers. Just a favor." Inspector Graves stepped forward. "Tell us clearly, who said that?" Her voice trembled. "Mr. Reed. He told me the stems were for a bouquet, a special order for the Evertons. He said to place them where the child would find them. I didn't question it." Reed's face darkened. "That's a lie," he snapped. She knew what she was doing. Miss Marple looked at him. "No, Mr. Reed," she said calmly. "She knew what you told her. That's not the same." Reed turned toward the inspector, desperate now. "She delivered them. She placed them by the shed. She's the one who—" Miss Marple's voice cut through, quiet but sharp. "You gave her poison disguised as beauty. She carried guilt she didn't understand. And Lucy," her voice softened, "was the one who touched it." Fiona gasped softly. Anne covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Daniel stared at Reed, his face pale. Reed's control cracked. He took a step back, then forward again, words spilling like venom. "She was an Everton. Her family destroyed me. Do you know what it's like to lose everything because of a signature, because of pride?" He looked at Thomas, his voice breaking. "You left me with nothing. I wanted you to feel the same emptiness." Thomas said nothing. Only his hands trembled on the cane. Miss Marple's eyes didn't leave him. "Reed's anger was the match," she said softly. "But you, mister." "Everton supplied the fuel." He looked at her slowly. "I?" "Yes," she said. "You cut your family apart. You turned your pride into a wall. You let others suffer for your silence. And Lucy lived inside that silence." The room held its breath again. Anne turned toward her father, tears running freely. "You told me Uncle Roger betrayed us? You lied. You kept us from him." Thomas tried to speak, but his voice failed. His lips moved without sound. He sank into the chair, head bowed. Reed laughed bitterly. "There. You see? We're the same, he and I. Pride and punishment. Only he had a home to hide behind." Graves spoke quietly. "Reed, you'll answer for your crime. But Miss Marple's right, this didn't begin in your shop." Miss Marple looked around the room at Edna, still weeping, at Anne clutching her chest, at Thomas broken in silence. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Hatred doesn't vanish when the door closes. It waits. It finds new hands. She turned toward Graves. "Take him," she said. Reed didn't resist. The inspector motioned the constable, and they led him out. When the door shut, Miss Marple's eyes lingered on Thomas. He couldn't meet her gaze. His face had gone grey. Her final words came soft, steady. "But the real death," she said, "began long before the poison. The house had emptied. Only the fire remained, burning low. The air was thick, not with talk, but with what had been left unsaid." Thomas Everton sat alone in the armchair, Kane beside him, head bowed, the weight of decades pressing down. Miss Marple stood near the window. Rain streaked the glass, slow and silent. For a long time, neither spoke. At last, she turned. "Mr. Everton," she said softly, "you've carried power like armor. But armor, when never set down, becomes a cage." He didn't look up. "I did what I had to. For my family." She moved closer. "For them," she repeated. "Or for yourself?" His fingers tightened around the armrest. "My daughter needed guidance. Anne was young, foolish in love. That man she married, Daniel, was unfit. I saw it from the start." Miss Marple's voice stayed even. "So you kept her dependent. You controlled what reached her. You decided who she could trust." He looked up at her sharply. "I protected her." "No," she said. "You possessed her." He stared at her, eyes narrowing. "What do you know of losing a child?" Her reply was gentle. "What do you know of letting one live freely?" The fire crackled. Outside, the storm deepened. "You silenced Roger," she continued. "You cut him from her life. You fed her only what suited your pride. And when Edna came, you saw how useful a servant she could be. Quiet, loyal, unseen." Thomas turned away. His voice dropped to a rasp. "She was supposed to keep order, to stop the letters. Anne was fragile. I couldn't let outsiders meddle." Miss Marple took a slow breath. "And in keeping order, you let deceit thrive. You taught everyone around you that silence meant safety. Even a maid learned that serving lies pleased her master." He pressed his hands against his eyes. His shoulders shook once, then again. Not rage this time, grief breaking free. "I never wanted this," he whispered. "I only wanted her near. I wanted to keep her safe. She's all I had left." Miss Marple's tone softened, but her words did not. "Some men love by caging what they adore," she said quietly. "But love inside a cage suffocates, and in the end it kills what it tries to keep." He lowered his hands slowly. Tears streaked the deep lines on his face. "What should I do now?" Miss Marple looked toward the fading fire. "Start by telling her the truth," she said. "Let her see the man behind the pride. Then let her decide if she forgives him." He nodded weakly. No strength left for argument. Only truth remained. Miss Marple turned toward the door. The storm had eased. The house felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had lifted with her words. She reached for her coat, her voice barely above a whisper. Now Skybridge may breathe again. 2 days later, Skybridge was quiet again. The clouds had cleared. The air smelled of rain and soil, clean, calm, forgiving. Miss Marple walked the garden path with Fiona. The roses had lifted their heads again. The pond reflected pale blue sky where grief once lingered. Near the lilac bush stood a new bench, small brass plaque fixed to its center, in memory of Lucy Everton loved and remembered. Fiona stopped beside it. "She'd have liked this spot," she said softly. "She always came here first, before school, to pick flowers that weren't hers." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Children never see boundaries, only beauty." They sat together. For a moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to breathe again, slow, measured, alive. "Anne's gone back to her parents," Fiona said. "Her father came with her. I saw him walking through the churchyard this morning. He looked smaller somehow." Miss Marple nodded. "Truth does that. It shrinks pride, but it grows the heart." Fiona looked at her. "Do you think she'll forgive him?" Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the flowers. "Perhaps not yet, but forgiveness is patient. It waits until sorrow gets tired of being heavy." The sound of teacups clinked faintly behind them, the housekeeper setting the tray on the table by the porch. The aroma drifted through the air. Strong, sweet, familiar. Fiona poured. Her hands were steadier now. She passed a cup to Miss Marple, who accepted it with a quiet thank you. "Edna?" Fiona asked after a pause. "Where will she go?" "Back to her sister, I believe," Miss Marple replied. "She will live quietly, as she always did. But perhaps now she'll understand that silence can wound as deeply as words." Fiona sighed. "And Mr. Reed?" "Gone," Miss Marple said simply. "The inspector took him to London yesterday. There's no pleasure in vengeance, Fiona. Only emptiness once it's done." They sat in silence again. The garden was still. Only the faint hum of bees broke the quiet. Miss Marple took a slow sip of tea. Her eyes softened. "Do you smell it?" she asked. Fiona tilted her head. "The lilacs?" "No." Miss Marple smiled gently. "The truth. It lingers, even after everything else fades. Truth, like scent, cannot be buried." Fiona looked down at the plaque, eyes misting. "You always make it sound so simple." "It isn't simple," Miss Marple said. "It's simply waiting for someone to notice." A breeze stirred the garden. The lilacs swayed. Somewhere beyond the gate, a cart rolled down the road, its wheels echoing faintly. And then, through the hush, came a sound. Soft, distant, a single bell ringing from the church tower. Fiona looked up. "Do you hear that?" Miss Marple nodded, eyes still on the flowers. "Yes," she said softly. "It's the village remembering." The bell rang once more, low, tender, and endless. Evening drifted over Skybridge like a sigh. Soft light brushed the rooftops. The day folded itself neatly into dusk. Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting in her lap, teacup cooling beside her. The garden outside glowed faintly roses, lilacs, a bench gleaming in the fading Sunday peace, at last. She set her knitting aside and watched the world quiet down. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the lane. A dog barked once, then silence. The kind of silence that belongs to villages that have finally exhaled. A knock came at the door, gentle, unhurried. Fiona entered with her usual smile and a small envelope in her hand. "The post came late," she said. "Only one letter." Miss Marple took it with mild curiosity. No return. Address. Neat handwriting. The kind that spoke of patience. She opened it carefully. Inside a single sheet. The ink faint, the words few. "For the child, I am sorry. For the silence, more so. May the truth live, where I could not." No signature. Only the faint smell of pressed flowers on the paper. Fiona leaned forward. "Who is it from?" Miss Marple folded the letter, slipping it back into the envelope. "Someone learning the weight of their own quiet," she said softly. Fiona hesitated. "Do you think it's from Edna?" "Perhaps." Her tone was gentle, reflective. "Or perhaps from someone who shared her silence." The clock chimed 7. Outside, the church bell answered in kind, one slow toll, deep and hollow. The rhythm of endings. Fiona poured tea. Steam curled like smoke, rising between them. For a while, neither spoke. There was no need. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the garden. The world seemed softer now, wounds covered, but not forgotten. "Funny, isn't it?" Fiona said quietly. "How truth hides in the simplest places. Letters, flowers, even in silence." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "That's the way of it. Truth doesn't shout. It waits. Sometimes for years, sometimes for a single brave moment." She lifted her cup. The first sip was slow, steady. Her eyes glimmered with calm certainty. "People think silence protects them," she said. "But silence only keeps the pain alive. Words once spoken let the heart breathe again." The light outside dimmed further. Crickets began to sing near the hedge. The night, once heavy with loss, now felt kind. Fiona gathered the empty cups. "Will you rest now?" "In a while," Miss Marple said softly. "Some stories take a little longer to settle." Fiona smiled, touched her shoulder, and left the room quietly. Miss Marple remained by the window. Her hand rested on the unopened letter once more. She looked out across the village, roofs fading into shadow, lamps glowing one by one. Her voice, barely above a whisper, carried through the stillness. Truth, time, and kindness. That's all the world ever needs. A faint wind stirred the curtains. The final bell rang in the distance, low, lingering, and full of promise. Miss Marple looked up, eyes warm. And somewhere, she said softly, in another quiet village, a letter arrives that no one remembers writing.